Okay, so hello everybody. Thank you again for joining us on the YouTube channel. I am here today with Vikram from Lightful. He's the senior UX designer of the team over at Lightful. Lightful are a social media monitoring tool predominantly. They also offer a number of other services. So, Vikram, could you tell us a little bit about what Lightful does and how it might be applicable to the people watching this video, and a little bit about your role there and what it is that you do?
Sure. Thanks for that intro. Yeah, so my name is Vikram. I'm the senior UX designer here at Lightful. So Lightful is a social media management platform where it's aimed at the third sector, so charities mainly. And what we do is we allow charities or individual users as well to manage their social media on using you can use multiple different accounts to manage your social media, so different Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. You can schedule, plan content, get hashtags, free media library, that thing. So it's a very simple tool aimed at sort of small to medium-sized charities. My role at the organization is I head up a discovery team. And discovery, for those who don't know, is really about learning. It's about learning what works, what doesn't, what our users think, essentially defining the roadmap and the features that will input into Lightful. So for example, we just recently added a hashtag generator, which hopefully you'll see soon on the platform. So yeah, that's a team of about 2 to 4 that I manage on a day-to-day basis.
Cool. Sounds really interesting. It's as we were talking previously, it's something that I'm particularly interested in as well, is the user experience. You know, not just kind of how we deliver these products, but the process that we go through to actually building them as well. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about in this interview was the idea of personas. Persona design is something that is quite, it's talked about quite a lot within the third sector, which is obviously a very good thing. So I just really want to get your take on what personas are for people who might not know what they are currently, and how you go about developing them, why you go about developing them, and the kind of benefits that that brings to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, personas are interesting. They were developed in the late '90s by a guy called Alan Cooper, who was an engineer, and he said it was very much an engineering mindset back then about developing software. And he said, I want to know what the actual user thinks. I want to get in the shoes of the user, so to speak. Back then, you know, products were designed from an engineering perspective. So what personas are a way of kind of getting out of that engineering mindset and into how people really think about a product and use a product. So what they are essentially is they are archetypes of people who use your product. They're very specific types of people who use your product, and they're the behaviors, the needs, the goals, and some of the key pain points of users of your product. They're not averages of people, so they're not sort of generalizations, but they're very particular sort of profiles of people who use your product. So you might have somebody, for example, who's a novice user, and they have these particular pain points. Maybe they need a lot of support. Maybe their goals are to learn how to, in our example, what makes a good social media post. That's maybe one of their goals. Maybe you have an expert persona who is more about trying to raise the number of followers they have. That might be one of their goals. So what they are, you give them a name, a photo, you give them a series of descriptive qualities, and you use those to help develop software for your platform, whatever you have. So that's sort of the general sort of basis of them. They are always based on user research. So they're never what your idea is. If they're just an idea of a person, then that's what you might, that's not really the correct way to go around them. What you want them to have is have them be rich, real, and constantly updated, so that when you're developing for your actual users and not your idea of a user.
Yeah, that's a very good point about not developing for your idea of a user, because when we start the conversations around whatever it is, whether it's you know, a mobile application or a website or some kind of campaign, we always have like this conception in our heads of what the end user looks like and what they kind of want, but it's not always the case. In fact, I'd probably argue that it's often not the case, and therefore that research needs doing. So feeding into the next question then, and I think you mentioned how you do some user research to kind of get you started. What's the process then for developing that further? You know, you say you get to the point where you give them names and you've got photographs and you keep them updated and all that kind of stuff, and that feeds into the development of the software. What does the process look like from that very first kind of like, okay, this is the research that we have, and then taking it through to an actual fully formed persona?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, it is important that you do have research, and however you get that, it's slightly different for customer research. As much as possible, I would say do user research. So and I know this isn't too much about different types of research, but do ethnography, interviews, contextual inquiry, whatever you can get to get these insights as much as possible. So essentially, what you should have is by doing this background of research, you should have a notes, basically. Not to put it, you should have a whole list of notes, however you might keep them. Maybe you have a list of issues in Airtable. Maybe you have scribblings in a notebook. Maybe you have, you know, you've talked a lot to the customer service and you've heard, or your customer success, or your some people on the ground, and they have information. However, you can get some of this this information. What you need essentially is you need a lot of notes, and that can be accommodated any number of ways. But what you want to do essentially is you want to turn those into some sort of systematized ideas of a person. So for example, if let's say you've interviewed 10 people, what you can do is you can map that out onto different personas. There's a number of different ways you can do that. And really what it depends on is how much time do you have, and how many different people, how much research you have, and how many different people you have doing it. So you can go from really robust methods where you might have, let's say you interviewed, as I was saying, sort of 10 people. What you might do, 10 or 15 people, you can create these spectrums. You can start mapping out from all the notes. You can do what's called affinity diagramming. So that essentially is just finding themes. So you might get everybody in a room, you might look at all your notes, and you might just write those on stickies. So write all these different observations from the notes. So maybe, for example, in our case, you might find that people are often going to Google Docs to find things that they might tweet. You might write that on a sticky. You might write that people are often don't have much time, and then then when you have those notes, you might say that the person who it was. You might say this was participant one or Bill or whomever, and you can start putting those on a wall. What you can start doing is you can start grouping those by themes, which is called affinity diagramming, which is a UX process that everybody uses. So imagine if you have all of these notes, all these stickies rather, with different. They might be quotes, they might be things that you've noticed, and all associated with different people. You can start grouping those into different categories. You can, by doing that, you can start seeing that Bill has certain qualities associated with them. Maybe Sheila does too. Maybe you might think that Bill and Sheila are actually quite similar. There's a lot of overlap between them. Are they a persona? They might be. So that's one way. You can start seeing that these different people, 2 or 3 different people maybe, are starting to have similar qualities. They're having similar pain points. They're having similar goals. And from that, by constantly reviewing, so you might go through it once, and then you may go through it a second time. And so maybe you take some more notes. Maybe you regroup them a little. You can start seeing these patterns emerge, right? And you can start seeing that that these people are the same. Those might be one persona. You might have another persona. So you might say this one persona is a beginner, or you might say this one persona is you might give them a name like a cautious learner, right? Maybe they're a short, pithy kind of description of them. They're a cautious learner, and then you might give them a name, a generic name. Say it's Tim, right? You might say it's Tim, it's a cautious learner. And then you might attribute all those qualities that we said. So their pain points are they need a lot of support. They don't have much time. They want resources. The goals are that they want to upskill very quickly in social media, for example. They don't understand basic analytics terms, for example. That might be another pain point. So it's a bit of a inductive process, but you can kind of see how that you generate these personas through these sort of mapping exercises, and it really depends on how much time you have, as I was saying, where you can really go in deep. If you just have a week or less, you can really try to make it sort of lean, what you might call, where you're doing the process what I'm talking about, where you maybe only talk to 10 or 15 people. But you can also do other techniques, like I talked about how you might find themes to divide the people. Well, you can also start out by dividing people by different job roles, for example, or what are the key variables that allow the people to be split apart. So let's say you talk to 15 again or 20 people. You can start out by 5 of them are interns. That's pretty much a persona right there. So you can sometimes, if the divide is sharp enough, you can start breaking them out. For some organizations, it might be more difficult, where you might have a really vague idea. So you might need to do what I was talking about earlier, like finding the themes and pulling out the personas from there. But yeah, sure. Really, it depends on your audience, basically.
Yeah, I think that the starting point is always the audience, isn't it? And it's also the ending point, really, when you think about it. You've got to sort of have an idea of who you're speaking to, because I think a lot of businesses in particular will start out thinking we can serve everybody and anybody, but actually there's always some kind of way that you can slice and dice that market to understand a little bit better who they are and how to serve them. And I quite like the whole idea of kind of going through this process to develop themes, because really it can feel like an overwhelming idea to begin with. Well, we've got all these different types of people who could use our software or our product or our service. How on earth are we supposed to understand what each and every single one of them wants? We can't service everybody as individuals, because at the end of the day, we're delivering a service here that's kind of not one size fits all, but it's one size fits many in a lot of cases. So the idea of themifying a lot of those users and their needs is really interesting. In terms of the work that you've done so far, then, for Lightful and in your career in the past, how often do you find that your assumptions are challenged, and have there been any kind of surprises that come out of the development of personas that you really didn't expect to find?
I think that's one of the most important things, is challenging your assumptions and the surprises that you receive. They are the most important things, because if you go through and you look at your personas and they're everything that you expected, that's it might be useful, but it's probably wrong, because almost certainly you will be surprised that if you manage to understand everything about your users, and you haven't gone through the research, then I would suggest that perhaps you need to do more research. You'll always be surprised. You will always find something that is unexpected. That is counterintuitive, that you just didn't know, that you might have formed a box around an idea and it's outside of that box. It's something that, I didn't even think about that. It's a different platform, or it's a different idea, or it's a different context. One that comes to mind is, until we went through the research that we had and built it down to the point, we didn't realize how scary. So our platform, you attach your social or your organization's social profiles to Lightful. So you connect them. You go through, it says connect your Facebook. Do you want to connect? Allow Facebook access to your email, et cetera, et cetera. You say yes. for a lot of us who are more savvy, tech savvy, it's whatever. I'll just say yes. For a lot of people, it's really scary. Yeah, for a lot of people, it's very scary. Though we found in the research, it's scary for a number of reasons. That it's an organization, and they don't want to necessarily be responsible for giving their organization data to another party. They might be new. They might not. They might be somebody who isn't familiar with this technology. And they might not know exactly what it means, right? So it was something that was scary, and we wouldn't ever think of that, right? It's, charities by nature as well are averse, that they're often very strict about data protection, strict about along ethical lines, and that's very important. So there's all these reasons that we didn't think necessarily about. Because for us, we often just connect your social profiles, so what have you. So we changed the platform, and we added that to our personas and made it a lot more. It's already certainly obviously safe and everything, but we made it much more obvious about how safe it is and how it is okay to connect your profiles. And that's just something, again, that's not necessarily intuitive, but we've added to our personas and updated the platform accordingly.
Oh, that's a really good point, actually, about people being risk averse and worried about connecting the social media to a platform that they've never actually used before. And what's interesting to me is my knowledge of personas is generally so that you can develop features for a product or a website. But actually, when you begin to understand, when you get the kind of learnings that you have from that process, where you've discovered that people are scared to connect their accounts or whatever it might be, but that actually feeds into the marketing and the messaging side of the business as well, rather than just as a sort of technical feature that's something you would deliver on a website or in a product. So that's quite interesting, how personas can inform the entire organization in many different ways, not purely from a functional user experience perspective as well.
Absolutely. And, our CFO and CEO were like, oh, that's really interesting. We didn't necessarily think about, or we weren't aware of it. It's not that you thought of it, you just weren't aware of it. And so we've changed our landing pages because of it. We've changed a number of things because of that finding.
Good. I suppose that's what it's all about, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, in terms of, obviously Lightful is a software as a service product with lots and lots of customers and different user types as well. If I was a small to medium sized charity organization watching this video and listening to you now, what would be your tips for kind of how they could go about developing personas and how they could go about using them in the work that they do? And also, if you could maybe shed some light onto some of the associated times and costs. I know you mentioned earlier, you said something about you could do this sort of, if you've only got a week to do it, then you could do some work there. But it'd be nice to get an idea of what kind of investment a smaller organization might be wanting to make.
It really is, I want to say as much as you can, but it's as much as you can get away with. One of the things that we find in doing a lot of this research is that, exactly as you say, this kind of stuff is so hard to do because people in charities are so time poor, and they're extended in terms of resources. In terms of investment, obviously it's only people time. It really is. The one thing that charities do have is they have often a strong connection with people on the ground. And what I would suggest is utilize these people as much as possible, any frontline workers, to understand who your personas might be, any notes that they have, because what a lot of people don't understand is that there's a lot of research, there's a lot of knowledge in people's heads. And one of the challenges is getting that out onto paper, and that might just be that can be you just speaking to anybody, frontline workers, people in different in related organizations, people in the office who know about the users, but really just getting that out of their heads and into notes, because what you do is you need really a backlog of notes. once you have sufficient amount of notes, really all it is it's getting you and so getting anybody involved in design, getting anybody, actually, ideally you want a number of people from different fields to go through these notes. So you might want somebody from all the different departments actually to get in a room to go through the notes just for a couple hours in a day and do that affinity mapping exercise. The advantage of that is twofold. One is it removes your bias. The other is you helps get you buy-in from other people in the organization. So once you've done that, you might take all those findings, make it a bit neater, put it in an Excel document. So this is what we found. Here's the groupings that we found with all the different variables. And you might start synthesizing that a bit more. You might have a second session where you go through and you synthesize it a bit more, and you get more buy-in from more stakeholders, and then you present those personas back. So really, ultimately, developing them isn't a lot of the time investment, but is a bigger time investment is getting that research together, is finding what those sources of that information is. But developing them isn't resource intensive at all. One of the bigger challenges is getting buy-in from them. So that's why I'm suggesting get as many people interested in them and interested in your project, especially senior stakeholders, and speak about the advantages, which we can certainly go into. But that's a bigger challenge, I would say, than any type of investment.
Yeah, I think from my experience as well, getting the buy-in to do anything is always the hard part. Getting the ball rolling is difficult, especially if you do need that sign off from people with more decision-making power in the organization than you. So you touched on there a little bit about the advantages of doing this. Obviously, that would be key to kind of getting that buy-in. I wondered if you could touch on that a little bit more, and then maybe also talk about how, so the development process, once you've got started, you can do that. How you then go about actually using those personas in your organization moving forward. So the advantages and the maintenance of them.
It's interesting. There's in a lot of the personas can be a bit divisive, because they can be seen as a bit woolly. They can be seen as a little bit, but it's a bit, so what? How do you know this is real? That kind of thing. People like hard data. People like, what are the numbers? What are, what are people doing on the website or service or wherever? That doesn't give you information about what people are doing and how they're doing it, right? And personas are intended to do just that. They're intended to get to these deeper questions and about the feeling. They're not intended to be hard numbers, right? So they're intended so that you can have an idea, that you can have empathy for these people. And once you have empathy for them, you can actually design for them. You can design products that address their pain points, that address their goals, that acknowledge their states of feeling. So as such, it means that you are designing for someone. You're not designing for a general amorphous idea that might be different, that each person might have a different idea about. So that's one key advantage, which is it allows everybody to agree on who we're designing for. You can stop, especially once you get buy-in, you can stop debating who the actual user is. Everybody doesn't have a different idea. You can put it on the wall and it says, that's who we're designing for. That's what we're designing for. Which kind of goes to another point, which is that it should be very, like I say, sharp. So personas are they're not just general mushiness, like they want the good usability or they want to save time, but they should be actual, real, interesting scenarios that are applicable and that are memorable, right? So their advantage in that they can create agreement, they can generate a lot of empathy, they can inform new features and help in the product roadmap, right? So what are we going to do next? Why? They can engender discussion, right? So imagine if they're in a meeting, you might say, well, how would Neela feel about this? You know, if somebody brings up, well, we should add a graph here. Would she understand this? You know, oh, maybe she would, maybe you're right. So what do we need?
Sure.
They allow you to create a hierarchy of who you're designing for. So you mentioned earlier, you can't design for everyone. And that's absolutely true. You cannot. If you design for everyone, you're designing for no one. So what's really important to have is a primary persona and say, we're designing for that person. We're not designing, you can't try to solve for everybody for everything. You can maybe try to create individual features that aim to support feature, but the main thrust should be of each area should be toward one user type. So it allows, again, that hierarchy, say that's our primary, maybe those are our secondary, at least for this bit. So it allows that. So there's a huge number of advantages in that sense. And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Yeah, so the second part was how you go about using and maintaining those personas once you've formed them, you know, initially.
Yeah. So using them is it's funny. It's really about getting them in people's faces. So once you've got them, it's really important to present them back to people, and it's showing them to people, showing them how they came about is really important, that they're based on actual research. So when you're presenting them back to people, let's say, here they are, here's who they're based on. You might show clips. So we do a lot of user testing and we show clips. We say, so this is one of our personas. Here's a clip from one of the personas. Video clips are extremely powerful. They create very strong associations with people. So present them back, say they came about. Try to make them pithy enough that each persona, it has a key messages that can be taken away. So as I was kind of describing all the pain points, goals, blah, 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 those are all very useful, but somebody in a very different department or area of the organization might not take all that in. What you want is you want each one to have at least one, or at most one or two key messages, and then, you know, a bunch of other sub messages. So if anybody takes away anything, it's that one or two key messages. So once you've presented them back, what you want to do is ensure that people, that you've sent them out to people, that they are using them, get them on the wall. So I would say wherever you're working, get them on the wall so you can talk about them. When you are designing new features, when you're doing road mapping, when you're doing any type of activity involved in discovery or design, research, bring them out, bring them to the meeting, talk about them, have them as an agenda item. So, and what you can begin doing is you can begin talking about how you address these various pain points. So if you have them on the wall, you can actually say, you can put a post-it and say, we're doing this feature because of that. Right? You can, when you're talking to your senior stakeholders, we're doing this because of this on the persona, right? Because we found this. So what they are is they are a catalyst and a supporter in all of your efforts for design, discovery, and for empathy. That said, it's also, I mentioned presenting them back and sending them out to everybody. It's really important that everybody has sight of them. So we just get them in people's faces, because all different types of people, developers, and everybody really should have empathy. They shouldn't be siloed. They shouldn't be something that only the designer and the developer sees. They should be visible, and you mentioned updated. They should be updated on a regular basis. That also allows you to present them back again. Look at our new findings. Here's what we learned again. This maybe this wasn't as true as we necessarily thought, or maybe it's more true than we thought. Maybe there's a new angle. Maybe there's something's changed in the environment of our business, and now we have to switch a little bit.
I mean, that's, you know, it sounds to me like once you go down the rabbit hole of almost allowing personas to lead everything that you do, from a business logic perspective, a marketing perspective, you may begin to realize that you wonder how you ever did without them almost. Especially if you bring them out, put them on the agenda for board meetings, and not just board meetings, but meetings in general. You're talking specifically about your users, and you've given them names and faces and requirements and all this kind of stuff. Then it's a really handy way to keep it front and center of people's minds. And I also like what you said earlier about it, kind of like you said, people like evidence, they like numbers, they like hard facts. But actually, personas does sound, sometimes it can sound a bit woolly and a bit fluffy, as you said. But actually, once you go through that process, it enables everybody to coalesce around what is actually evidence, because you've already done user research to form those personas in the first place. So actually, what starts off as kind of a potentially a fluffy idea does translate over time into something, a real valuable business asset that people can actually use. And it draws out a lot of the arguments that people have around, well, I think that we should do this, I think that we should do that. Well, actually, what would Bob or Sandra think about what we're going to do here? So it's a really interesting way of seeing business development, and the way that we kind of produce our content, and we write our code, and we deliver our services.
Absolutely.
So sorry, carry on.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say it is absolutely. It's selling arguments is really important.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different people who can have a lot of different ideas, and pointing to the person on the wall who doesn't have a investment in something that they really think is important, but is somebody who uses a product, that can help solve a lot of arguments, solve debates, and provide direction.
Yeah, and I think from a designer perspective, I've been working in delivering website design now for over 15 years. And when I was a lot younger, it was all very much around either what the client thought or what I thought. And quite often there was some conflict there. And nobody was actually talking about what the end user of the product would actually think or need. And really, personas enables you to kind of put them at the heart of the whole process.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'll just finally then, I mean, I don't know if you're going to be able to succinctly do this. It's a challenge that I hope you'll accept, but just very basic top tips for creating personas. You've obviously been through a lot during this chat, but if we can sort of give some really basic takeaways that people can hopefully apply after they've watched this, that'd be really useful.
Yeah. You mentioned they're based on research. So yes, base them on research. Don't make them up. It'll give you more confidence as well when you're presenting them. It'll allow you to be strong, present them stronger. So base them on real research. Don't say, that's close enough. Do and make sure that that you believe them, because if you don't believe them, then nobody else will. Make them sharp. What I mean by sharp is that you can do something with it. So if I'm listing, I see a lot of personas that, there are a lot of personas that maybe aren't as good as they should be. I see some of them, sometimes they come off just bland, like generic, where you see things like, oh, they want to save time. They don't like difficult things. It's, so what are you going to do with that? Everybody likes that. So when I say sharp, make it so that you immediately understand what to do because of that, right?
Be specific with it.
Be specific. You don't need to be. You don't need to say the exact problem, but you need to be. You need to understand what that entails. In other words, so if they feel like this, then you should do this, right? So you can apply it to different to any number of scenarios. I would also say don't make them marketing profiles. I see personas sometimes that are demographics are, what their interests are, what they do on the weekend, things like that. Personas aren't marketing profiles. They're very different. They're about how somebody feels, how they act, what their goals are. They're not very. There is a bit of overlap, but they are different. They don't keep them lean if you don't have a lot of time. I'd suggest you go and Google lean personas. Anybody who is worried about the amount of time it takes. There's a lot of good help out there. You can, by lean, I mean very simple and basic, but still useful. So I'd suggest you do that. Finally, I'd suggest, or not finally, I'd suggest you keep them updated for one, and put them in people's faces. Again, I've said that before, but get them everywhere, post them up on the wall, send them out to people, use the names, what's really important to give them names, because you can use those names, use it in dialogue when you're talking to people constantly. I think that's about it. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, I mean that's really good. I think I was looking at your LinkedIn profile earlier as well, and you used the term human design rather than user design, user experience design. You know, there's the whole UX industry, user experience, but actually there's more of a movement now towards you know, not using the word user as much and identifying them as humans, which kind of puts you on that empathic stance rather than seeing them as just this entity that you're serving in some way. So that's so it's a very different way of looking at it.
Yeah. It's just, I think making that you put a photo on them, right? If that doesn't have to be somebody you actually talk to. It can be a fake photo, but making them human is the goal. It's not even though it's a fake person, it is a real person, if that makes sense. Sure. Yeah, it's a real person out there somewhere, the type of a person, right? So yeah, making them human is absolutely vital. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Vikram, for your time there. Very useful. I'll stop recording now.
Okay, great. No, thanks for having me. That was fun.
Thank you very much. Bye.